Thanks for joining me today. I'm Jeff Thiel. For the past 6 years, I've focused all my time and resources on solving the global warming crisis. I've been investing in companies with decarbonization innovations, consulting with organizations to help them scale their climate impact, and advocating for bold climate policy by governments. I'm going to speak with you today about how you can help stop global warming. I'm sure you understand that global warming is happening now. It's caused by humans burning fossil fuels on a massive scale for over 100 years. And that unless we stop burning fossil fuels, conditions on large portions of our world will become incompatible with human life. But you may not understand that we can choose to avoid a climate disaster. We already have all the solutions we need to cut our emissions in half. And the solutions we need to get to zero and then negative emissions are coming soon. But we must move a lot faster if we want a livable world in the future. The planet needs your help. In our short time together today, I hope to convince you to become a climate solutions leader. Unless you haven't read the news for a year, you must be aware that global warming is accelerating. It seems like every month we've seen a new extreme weather record. This year will be the hottest ever. The past 8 years have been the hottest 8 years ever. The oceans are as hot as a jacuzzi in some places. The damage from droughts, storms, and fires is breaking records on every continent. Many people are suffering and some people are dying from extreme weather. And it's going to get worse until we stop dumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and start to actually remove some of the gases we've already dumped. Climate scientists agree that we have to cut our global greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030 to have better than even odds at avoiding catastrophic levels of warming. The International Panel on Climate Change Mitigation Working Group recently published a report summarizing the current situation and making recommendations. They observed that during the period from 2010 up to 2020, we dumped more greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere than ever before, though the rate of increase did slow significantly. They also observed that emissions are concentrated among wealthy households and in wealthy countries. They concluded that unless we cut global emissions in half by 2030, it won't be possible to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees. So we know what we need to do. We also know how to do it. To eliminate carbon pollution from our economy, there are 8 changes we must make everywhere and quickly. First, we have to make our buildings, vehicles, and industry very efficient. Secondly, we have to decarbonize the electrical grid by adding massive amounts of solar, wind, advanced nuclear, and geothermal generation capacity. Once we have all that clean electricity, we need to switch fuels to clean electricity wherever possible. We have to use electricity to heat and cool our buildings and to drive our vehicles. We have to fix how our food system works. Food production is a major source of emissions. We must reduce waste, eat a plant-rich diet, and change how we grow crops. We need to restore our natural carbon sinks. Our oceans, forests, wetlands, and soils have tremendous capacity to absorb carbon dioxide if we manage them well. We must use alternative fuels for energy-intensive uses like trains, planes, and industrial processes. Materials that we need for all the comforts of modern living are a big contributor to global warming. We have to find pollution-free ways to make concrete and steel and other important materials. Finally, we need to develop ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere. We've released too much CO2 already to have a stable climate in the future. Now, these changes are going to take a lot of investment for sure, but most experts agree that these changes will pay off with cheaper energy, less pollution, better health, and less damage from extreme weather. Now, reducing energy waste is something we can do right now, and it can have a big impact in countries that use a lot of energy every day. This chart shows the amount of energy used per person in wealthy developed countries. Note that the countries represented by the red bars, Canada, Saudi Arabia, the United States, use more than twice as much energy per person as the countries represented by the green bars, France, Germany, Japan. What is common to the high energy users is the fact that they have a lot of domestic fossil fuel resources. So they don't pay as much for energy, and therefore don't focus on trying to use it efficiently. In contrast, the countries that have few fossil resources tend to use them sparingly, but they're not suffering as a result. People in France, Germany, and Japan aren't taking cold showers in the dark. I know from my personal research that Americans and Canadians could be just as efficient in their use of energy without a significant sacrifice. We just have to make it a priority. Now, recently, we've reached a critical milestone that gives me hope. It's now cheaper to make electricity from the sun or wind than from fossil fuels, even without subsidies. This chart shows the unsubsidized levelized cost of different ways to produce electricity. The term levelized here means that the costs of building the production facility and operating it are spread out or leveled over the life of the project. Solar energy costs have fallen over 90% in the past decade, and they continue to decline. Energy storage costs are declining rapidly as well. So today it's possible to make electricity available most of the day by pairing solar panels with batteries. The cost for fossil fuels that are shown here don't include the cost of greenhouse gas pollution. If the true costs of carbon pollution are accounted for, fossil fuels are far more expensive. In many cases, the cost of keeping existing coal plants running is now higher than the cost of building new solar or wind plants. So we would all save money if we just shut those coal plants down now. Most of our light vehicle transportation needs to be converted from gasoline to electricity to achieve our emissions goals. This transition's already underway, and I'm excited to report that it's accelerating. This table summarizes the strong momentum in the electric vehicle industry. The number of EV models to choose from is exploding. The distance you can drive on a single charge is doubling or tripling. For me, range is no longer a significant concern except for cross-country trips. When I started driving an EV, the total cost of owning the car was similar. Now it's lower. Soon it's going to be much lower. The last barrier to the transition to EVs is the higher upfront cost. But as battery prices fall and the scale of EV production rises, electric vehicles will become cheaper to buy as well. And depending on the incentives available where you live, they may be already cheaper. You can see this transition underway when you look at the kinds of vehicles being sold in different places. In China, you can get an electric vehicle for only $1,000 that seats two with a little room for cargo and goes 25 miles an hour. In Norway, most new car sales are already electric vehicles. The European Union and China expect that electric vehicles will be as much as 40% of new car sales in just 2 years. Zero-emission homes are more comfortable, they're healthier, and cheaper to operate. The zero-emission home uses very little energy because it's tightly sealed and well insulated with high-performance windows. It only uses electricity, no gas. The lighting and appliances are very efficient. A ventilation system cleans the air and takes the energy from that air that has been heated or cooled. The heating and cooling system's a heat pump that delivers 3 to 4 times as much heating or cooling per unit of energy as a gas furnace. And it works well now, even in very cold temperatures. Solar panels provide enough electricity to run the house and charge the car, which also doubles as storage in case of a power outage. All of these technologies are available now, and you can install them in existing homes to cut the carbon footprint of an existing house. A zero-emission food system is achievable now if we work together to make it happen. Researchers estimate that 30% or more of our food is wasted as it completes the journey from farm to table. Food waste directly causes greenhouse gas emissions because rotting food produces methane. There's no single change that can solve most of this problem, but there are many best practices that have been shown to save money while reducing food waste. By implementing those best practices systematically, we can cut food waste and the associated emissions. Switching calories from meat to plant sources is a key tool for reducing the emissions from our food system. Production of beef and lamb generates about as much greenhouse gas emissions as the entire transportation sector. This is because ruminants, digestive systems, generate a lot of methane, which comes out in their burps, and because land converted to pasture stores a lot less carbon. Our farms have the potential to take carbon dioxide out of the air while improving our depleted soils. To do that, we have to change how we farm. Most cropland is cultivated with a system where the soil is dug up every year or tilled, and the soils are exposed outside of the growing season. This system results in soil erosion, poor soil health, and poor water retention, as well as causing much of the carbon in the soil to get released into the atmosphere. In contrast, a regenerative agriculture system, farmers don't till the soil and they keep it covered with crops all year. This system results in less erosion and moves carbon from the air into the soil, which improves soil health and productivity. Before we started burning fossil fuels on a massive scale, the carbon cycle on our planet was in balance. The natural processes that emit carbon were matched by the natural processes that absorb it. But we've compromised the ability of even our natural carbon sinks to absorb carbon dioxide, which is adding to the global warming crisis. You've probably heard that deforestation is making global warming worse. Our forests have much greater capacity to absorb carbon dioxide than either crop or pasture land. We've been converting so much forest to croplands and pasture lands that we've reduced the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed by the land every year. This chart shows that by one estimate, we are currently planting about 2 billion trees per year, but we're cutting down 15 billion trees per year. Our oceans have absorbed so much carbon dioxide and so much heat that they were becoming more acidic, which is causing harm to shellfish, increasing the potential for toxic algae blooms. You can help mitigate global warming by supporting the organizations that are working to study and to protect the health of our natural carbon sinks. So far, I've discussed 5 of the 8 major changes we talked about earlier. We have all the solutions we need to make those changes right now, and we'll be better off for investing them. For the remaining 3 changes, the solutions we need are being developed, and they're going to be commercially available soon. To decarbonize heavy-duty vehicles and energy-intensive manufacturing, we need alternative fuels that have high energy density. Hydrogen is a fuel that many people believe will play a big role in reducing carbon emissions. It's very combustible, and when burned in a fuel cell, the only byproduct is water. Today, most hydrogen is created from fossil gas, but new methods for making hydrogen by splitting water molecules with clean electricity are improving rapidly. Experts believe that by 2030, it will be possible to create hydrogen cheaply at large scale. Now, today we use a lot of materials to provide all the comforts of our daily lives. And those materials not only take a lot of energy to make, but they also emit carbon dioxide through the chemistry of the production process. Take cement, for example. If cement were a country, it'd be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Cement is made by heating limestone to very high temperatures, where it breaks down and releases carbon dioxide. The powder that is left is what we mix with sand, gravel, and water to make concrete. Construction experts estimate we can cut concrete use 30% now by just not over-specifying the strength of the concrete that's needed. We can use less cement in the concrete mix by curing it with carbon dioxide. And new ways to make cement that eliminate the emissions from the production process are showing great promise. I believe that by 2030, we'll have many low-emission materials to use to make buildings and products. Finally, we need to learn how to remove carbon from the atmosphere at large scales to have a stable, safe climate. Many carbon removal technologies are being demonstrated at small scales right now. I'm confident that in about 10 years, we'll have affordable ways to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at scales that are large enough to help us avoid a climate disaster. So these solutions are all good news, but here's the bad news. We're not deploying those solutions fast enough to avoid a climate disaster. This chart shows the change in per capita emissions for regions that represent over 90% of global population. The blue line shows global per capita emissions, and you can see that since 2009, the emissions globally have been flat. They are at about 4.7 metric tons per year per person. But the emissions vary dramatically by region. The 60% of the world's population that lives below the equator emits about 2 metric tons per person per year. And Sweden, a developed country with a very high standard of living, emits 4 tons per person per year. In contrast, the US and Canada are at about 17 metric tons per person. The European Union is about 7.5, and China is at about 6.5 metric tons per person per year. So the example of Sweden is really intriguing to me because it shows what's possible if we try. And how have they reduced their emissions? Well, first of all, they introduced the first carbon pricing system and made reducing emissions a national priority for a long time. And as a result, they've been chipping away at their emissions and have it down to very low levels. People in the global south want to use more energy to improve their living. We have to help them use clean energy to do that. So people in the global north really are the ones who have to reduce their emissions much faster. To date, the United States and Canada have cut per capita emissions about 1% per year, the Europeans by 2% per year, and the Chinese by about 3% per year. Actually, in the case of China, they've increased their emissions by 3% per year. To cut global emissions in half, the US and Canada will need to reduce emissions by 22% per year, the Europeans by 14%, and the Chinese by 13% every year through 2030. So you can see that we're not on track to avoid climate disaster, and that's why you need to get involved. You can help stop global warming. Here's how. First thing you need to do is talk to everyone you know about these solutions. Help them understand that we'll be better off if we adopt these solutions now. Then measure your own emissions. Reduce them by more than 50%. Be a leader. Demand change from your elected officials. Political leaders reflect your priorities. Tell them you want bold climate policy now. Write them, call and meet with them, and hold them accountable. Finally, put your entrepreneurial energy and skills to use by working on these solutions. We need leaders like you to help us speed up the decarbonization process. Now, you may think that as one person, you can't have much impact, but I assert that's not true. You may recognize the young woman in the picture on the right. Greta Thunberg was a shy 15-year-old who was very anxious about the future and what it would be like with global warming. In the fall of 2018, she skipped school on a Friday to strike for the climate outside the Swedish parliament. She kept coming back every Friday. Since then, she's addressed governments and world economic leaders, sparked a global student movement, and was named Person of the Year by Time magazine. In September 2019, millions of people around the world went on strike to protest inaction toward the global climate crisis. Now, if one person can do that much, just imagine what we could all accomplish if we got organized and worked together. Thank you for being a climate game changer.